get into this next area is if you think about a takeaway, no global industry standard, because we definitely live in a global world, and when you're choosing papers, you have to ask the question, where was it made? The next question was regarding your mill brand versus private brand. If it's a private brand, what's the mill manufacturer for that private brand?
Specifically, if you want repeatability, if you want it to look the same next time you print it, if it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. But if you have something you're going to print it in 3 months, 6 months, or a year, and you want it to look the same, that's where the mill brand carries more weight than a private brand. If it's a one-off, you just say gloss, and that's fine. So.
The other recommendation would be around that topic of making sure you know whether you go read or not, is if you think about, you ran a job last year and you ran it on an 80-pound gloss text domestic paper, and the job comes back and you're a little tight on money and you're hearing that, oh, if I get that paper that's made in Asia or somewhere in Europe, it's a little bit less expensive. Can you get me that? Great. You did that and you wanted to, you have to take some considerations, take some things into consideration, and one of them being the basis weight of the paper. So if you flooded that glass job with ink from edge to edge, and you ran it on, and I should have said 70 pound in the first go, 70 pound domestic, it's coming back up again, you might want to bump up in basis weight, because the fiber content is far less on papers made in Europe than here in the US. It uses a lot more coating, beautiful printed surface, but the fiber content is less, so they make up for it with coating. So you may need to go up in your basis weight, depending on what it is. So those kind of things, that's why it's so important to ask the questions. So we covered the domestic versus import, product characteristics across the board, where they come from, as far as across the paper machine, coated versus uncoated, and again, in your packets, might be included definitions on some of these uncoated, hot roll, and so you got all of those. Now when you think you're finished, you're not. Quick sidebar, we're going to hand these out. This is something Sappi came out with just a couple of months ago, and then we've updated it about a month ago, is the paper selection guide. In it, there's 3 things in it. One of the things that's inside of this is the digital selection guide. Bring it backward. Digital selection guide, an on-product label guide, so anybody that's producing a piece where you need to know, can I use FSC logo versus SFI and all those. This card is included to help you along with that as far as environmental certifications. And then the overview, which is this piece, and obviously it outlines the Sappi brands that we touched on today, both sheephead and web. But one of the other really cool things in this piece is it folds out, and it'll give you kind of a good, better, best across brands and finishes. Whether it's good, excellent, and so on. And the flip side of it, same thing for web papers. Okay, so you have good, better, best, gives you the product specs and that kind of thing. And then the last page will give you some of the definitions that you saw here for coated finishes. So the terms. Okay, so that should be a handy, helpful piece. So if you could, please stay open. The one attribute you really need to consider is that paper would be a thin color. Think about CMYK and then paper. If you're going to use a blue-white sheet, and Mike Cooper he touched on this earlier, that's going to have a definite impact on what that image is going to be, especially if you're reproducing flesh tones. So this is kind of a magnified image, and you can see CMYK and then the substrate under. You've all seen this, the Flint ink book? No? This is the only one I have, so this is as close as you're getting to it. This is a wonderful tool, and I'll pass this around, and they actually have it, I think, in reflex blue as well, which is a
I
really
think
good
that's the
color.
Coca-Cola red or whatever.
Yeah, it's referred to as Coca-Cola red. Coca-Cola, of course, is not going to tell any of us what their red is, but one thing to think about is, and I'm going to pass this, is that is one PMS color. One PMS color, and when you have that in your hand versus trying to see the imagery here, it's just dramatic. When you take that same PMS and you take it from a coated to an uncoated, and then you go to whether it's a craft. This is kind of a list that you see on the side here of what is
I mean,
this.
but you look, I mean, it's one of those town things, and I mean, I went to a presentation, actually, we got invited into Hopkins one day, and they had their stuff. I mean, when I tell you that was the spectrum, theirs is a blue they use. But when I tell you the spectrum was that wide, we're not exaggerating. And they just had it spread out on this big conference table and said, why? Why does this look like this? And that really kind of, we said, because you're using different paper starts. This is an offset, this is a soap, this is a, you know, this is a Mohawk options. I mean, we could almost tell what the papers were by how close it was to what we knew what their actual color was. And it really was, it was the paper signature. And they really want, they don't want that. They don't want their brand or their name out there to look like that, you know. And it's amazing to us, you know, that's the reason we're getting called in more and more to these corporations and things, because they want their, you know, thing to look the same across the area, across the region, whatever. So, you know, when you talk about the paper, everyone thinks it's, oh, it's 25 or 30 or whatever % cost of the job, but just whatever, and really show you what it does to the imaging.
And yeah, and to one of your points earlier was, if you look at that, you can see listed number 1 dull coated, and then number 3 matte coated. You can have a number 1 dull coated and a number 2 dull coated from the same paper mill, and you're going to have just as dramatic a difference. So consistency, consistency, consistency. All of this is really important because I know that you went through, Steve shared a little bit with me, the gentleman that shared all of this with you earlier, what he talked about. And, you know, because paper, you know, we consider paper the 5th color, you need to really think about it. I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to share something, I'm not going to be as detailed, I'm not anywhere near being the same neighborhood as Steve on this. But SACI produced one of the series of standard, and I'm hoping when I turn around and I ask, is everybody familiar with the standard? Everybody's hand's going to be raised? We produce a series called The Standard, and we cover topics across the board. We've been doing this for a long, long time. It's an educational piece, mostly directed at the creatives in the industry, but we touch on things like the first standard, we did preparing files for print. The second standard you have in your hands is managing color. Number 3 was about varnish techniques and UV and aqueous and using coatings as a design element rather than just
I have all this
engineering.
stuff already.
Number 4 was on folding and scoring, and we did something here at McFarland not long ago on that. And then we most recently came out with number 5, which is on special effects. This book, really kind of a quick little background, the paper that this book was printed on is Lustro. If you've been around for any time at all, you would know Lustro or LOE. Unfortunately, like losing an old friend, it was discontinued just a couple of years ago. But Lustro among papers is a neutral or balanced white. Very low level fluorescence in the sheet. So when we produced this book, it made perfect sense to print it on Lustro to demonstrate what we were trying to demonstrate. Paper being a different color, thinking about using profiles, understanding different color spaces, and kind of dramatic. Before we get into a couple of slides here, I'm not going to go through this whole book, so if anybody's tight for time, don't worry. I'm not going to stand up here and make you go through every page of this. But I want to point out one thing. First, the human face or flesh tones are the most difficult for printers to reproduce. Most difficult to reproduce. So if you're going to do that, ask all the questions that we've been telling you about. Talk to your printer early and often, early and often. If you think about the first proof that you would create, might be at you're sitting in front of your monitor, you're going to print out right on your desktop printer. Think about that being the first proof that you produce. The kind of paper that you're probably going to have in that printer is going to be some sort of an uncoated, and in this first spread here, you can see where her face is split. That was done purposefully. This is an uncoated paper. I think it's made by Warehouse or John now, but you just look at the dramatic difference of that substrate, and let's say you decided you wanted to print your job on Lustro at the time. Look at that shape difference and know how much impact that's going to have on her face when you ultimately reproduce it. So you've got your proof at your desk, but you're going, okay, Naomi, I'm going to come down to the plant and do a fresh check on that job you're running on Lustro, and you bring your proof from your simplifiers, obviously. You're going to go, oh, wait a minute, why did that happen? This is why that happened. If you think about this horseshoe that you see up here, that would be, you know, the whole spectrum of color. So the human eye sees the entire spectrum, and that varies depending on gender. Men and women see color differently. What age you are, that changes it again. So the human eye takes in this whole spectrum of color. And as you look at this, of course this is a horseshoe, but I'm going to give you a different analogy here. Think about that as the color that you see in life as a beach ball. Okay? You take your camera, you take a picture, and it's RGB film. So now that's compressed to, let's say, a basketball. The basketball, you're taking it from film to RGB monitor, so what you're going to, what you have in front of you, that compresses it again. And every time you're doing this, it's called total compression. And I know that Steve, I think, touched on that a little bit. And why this is important is you're going to have to try to figure out as you go through the process, how are you going to capture what's outside of those windows. So then you move into CMYK, software that's involved, and then CMYK on the press. Color management folks, maybe more today than just a couple of years ago, rarely take into consideration paper when they're looking at the gamut of color that can be reproduced. So now your window keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So when you're working with someone here at McCarville, you're going to say, wait a minute, I need that out here. How are you going to help me bring that in? And if, later on when you want to flip through this, the rest of this book is really about how you can do that through print techniques. But first you have to really pay attention to get it, that it happens, that that phenomenon happens, called total compression. Back up, please. So as we're, but this is all very, very important for the obvious reasons that you're going to lose that as you go through. One of the things that is suggested, and it's very important, is that you calibrate your printer and monitor. If you're going from one device to the next, every device has a different color space. And in a perfect world, when you've created all the profiles that I know that you do,